Scientists have long been exploring the hypothesis that at the dawn of the formation of our solar system, one of the planets, a gas giant, was forced out of the gravity of the Sun by its brother, Jupiter. It disappeared forever into the freezing depths of space, despite the fact that it was hundreds or even thousands of times larger than Earth. Researchers believe that in our galaxy alone there are tens of billions of rogue planets that were thrown out of orbit by their more powerful and active relatives, and similar cases have occurred in every solar system. But what if this happens to us? To begin with, let's imagine that some object's gravitational influence pushed our planet into the orbit of Mars. The good news is that humanity could survive. The bad news is that only a few of us would survive. As soon as the Earth begins to move away from the Sun, everything will cool down. Even according to the most conservative estimates, within a few years, the entire surface of the Earth will be covered with a sheet of ice. The average temperature on the surface of Mars is minus 60 degrees. But unlike Mars, higher gravity and a powerful magnetic field would allow Earth to retain its atmosphere. The greenhouse effect would even out the temperature difference between day and night. And even global warming, triggered by emissions from our global industries, would work out to our advantage. Of course, at such a temperature, agriculture and the raising of livestock as it's done today would not be possible, and the planet will not be able to feed 8 billion inhabitants. You would have to leave your hometown and huddle in underground settlements closer to the equator. By using geothermal springs to grow the available types of food, you would only be able to eat mainly mushrooms and algae. I predict the emergence of a technocratic society with a rigid paramilitary structure and forced regulation of consumption and fertility, where everything is subordinated to a single goal: survival. But even in such extreme conditions, humanity would stand a chance of survival and possibly continue its existence. After all, we would still have water, atmosphere, and a significant amount of energy resources at our disposal. But let's try to push the Earth even further. For example, into the orbit of Pluto. I have to say right away, this time the atmosphere would not save us from the extreme cold. The average temperature on the surface of Pluto is minus 220 degrees Celsius, which means that nitrogen and oxygen in the atmosphere would turn into a liquid state, and the air would forever remain the only liquid on the surface of our planet. The Earth's crust and oceans would freeze under a sheet of ice that becomes thicker every year. Fleeing from the wild, murderous cold, humanity would be forced to bury itself in the Earth's crust, as close as possible to the red-hot, boiling mantle. At some point, the process of natural revival would begin. It would be quite cruel. Most of us would remain on the surface to freeze to death. But once this is over, select groups could descend into the depths of the Earth and begin a new underground existence. To survive, the remnants of the Homo sapiens species would have to make incredible efforts in the shortest possible time. Develop new technologies yet unknown to us in order to ensure access to energy and sufficient oxygen in order to breathe. But the good news is that the oceans would freeze from the surface downwards. And as they freeze, they would actually isolate the deeper layers. It could take hundreds of thousands of years before the oceans would freeze completely, which means that some living organisms would be able to survive in deeper parts for millennia, especially near active volcanoes, which would retain relative heat. In theory, if we have enough time, we could build an underwater habitat in the deep oceans as a refuge for humanity. But let's try to fly even further. Imagine that our planet has left the solar system along with a tiny fraction of a percent of the Earth's population and continues on its way through cold, inhospitable space at absolute zero, that is, minus 273 degrees, among streams of hard cosmic radiation. At first glance, the outcome seems obvious. The slow extinction of the last remaining representatives of the human race would be caused by cold and hunger in underground shelters. Perhaps they would be able to create and maintain nuclear reactors, or use the heat of the Earth's core for decades or even centuries. But space is truly empty and boundless, and our frozen ball could fly through it for millions of years only to reach its inevitable death. There isn't any probability of accidentally flying to a suitable star and falling into just the right orbit, except perhaps unless you yourself turn your planet into a spaceship. At first glance, this looks like the plot of a fantasy novel, but sometimes fantastic theories turn into real life much sooner than we might think. Nuclear experts Mieczysław Taube and Walter Seifritz have calculated a mathematical model for the transformation of planet Earth into a gigantic spaceship. To implement this incredible plan, 24 engines must be installed at the equator, each of which would be a cluster of hundreds of rockets with 30-kilometer nozzles. The energy for such a voyage should be provided by thermonuclear reactors, and each rocket, during operation, would emit 100 tons of super-hot hydrogen every second at a speed of 300 kilometers per second. Well, considering to travel through space, if humanity knows the final destination and calculates the travel time, it may have more powerful incentives for survival than just flying to nowhere. But who knows if we can figure out just where to fly? The universe is full of unpredictable dangers. Before you is the Toucan Cluster 47, one of the brightest and most numerous globular clusters in our galaxy. More than 500,000 stars reside here, and if we were located there, our sky would be completely strewn with all of these stars. At first glance, this is even quite beautiful, but the reality is much worse. These stars are so densely packed that supernova explosions would inevitably destroy any life on the surface of Earth. So there are many places in our galaxy that are completely unfriendly to settlers, and we shouldn't forget that even in its center, there's a real monster, a black hole. There's absolutely no need to fly through space and time only to eventually be swallowed up by it. So, when thinking about resettlement, we must first analyze everything carefully. But now we'll consider the most daring and insane scenario. Let's simulate the Earth in one of our neighboring galaxies. For example, in the Andromeda Galaxy. It is the largest galaxy in our local group, containing about 1 trillion stars. Of course, there would probably be a place for us there too. The task of surviving for humanity in this case is quite elementary: to find a suitable location on the outskirts of the galaxy, without active star formation and without supernova explosions, away from black holes and clouds of cosmic dust. Then carefully choose for yourself a calm new sun, without potential thermonuclear cataclysms and without the threat of asteroid bombardments. It should also not be too old, so that the settlers don't have to look for a new homeland after 1 billion years. We might even have to push some lifeless planet out of the system to ensure a safe orbit. It will probably be a little hotter than we're used to, or we will no longer have winter and summer. But those who emerge from the frozen stone depths under the new sun probably won't complain. And one more bit of good news. The moon will make all this long journey through the cold and darkness with us. It all sounds like a complete fantasy, but not so long ago, submarines and airplanes were also fantasy. Of course, we absolutely don't want to fly to a new world through an unforgiving space and live in the depths below the surface of the Earth, telling our grandchildren stories about forests and oceans. I hope that these prospects will remain only on the screens of smartphones and computers. In the meantime, everything is calm. Subscribe to my channel, and if something happens, the knowledge you learn might help you to find yourself among the survivors.